Parshas Bo. I'd like to dedicate this year L'Zecher Nishmas Moshe David ben Naftali Yosef Halevi. Perek Yud Beis Psukim Aleph and Beis 12 verses 1 and 2. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe v'el Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim limor. Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, to Moses and Aaron, in the land of Egypt, saying, here we go. HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodashim. This month shall be for you the beginning of months. Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei hashana. It is the first month of the year for you. What's the significance of these verses? Well, it starts the months. Hashem tells Moshe about the order of the months in the calendar. But there's something deeper beneath the surface here. For those who are students of Rashi, the very first Rashi of the Torah, even suggests that there's a difficulty with the Torah's beginning with the story of the creation of the world and everything that follows until these verses. Why? Because these verses, observes Rashi, it's based on a medrash. There's actually Yalkut Shimoni on this parsha, which says the same thing, which is that the Torah should have begun, or might have understandably begun with these verses, because they are Mitzvah, Hamitzvos Rishona Shenitztavu Bo Yisrael. This is the first mitzvah that Israel was commanded with. Now, what is this mitzvah? It seems simply to be descriptive. It seems just to be saying this month is the first of the months. What's the mitzvah? So the Rambam, the Bahag, and others say that this is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, or Kvius HaChodesh, which is establishing the month. When does the month begin? And the year. So there is a calculation of the calendar, which is a mitzvah. Now, upon whom does this mitzvah devolve? Who's obligated in this mitzvah? Do you have this mitzvah? Do I have this mitzvah? No. The Rambam says it's a mitzvah on all of Israel, meaning on the people of Israel, as represented or carried out by the Beis Din HaGadol b'Yerushalayim, the great court in Yerushalayim. Beis Din acting as on behalf of, perhaps as the representative of, the Jewish people, establishes the month. How do they do that? Someone shows up and says, I saw a new moon. The Medrash pointed out in Rashi says that Moshe had some difficulty. Exactly why that is another subject for discussion. And Hashem pointed to the new moon, the moon in its smallest form, that smallest visible, the smallest visible part of the moon. The moon stays more or less constant in its shape, but because of the reflection of the sun in its and the moon in its orbit, only a sliver of it is seen at its lowest point. So the sun waxes and wanes, and when it's at its lowest point, about to begin waxing again, growing again in terms of the visible area, that's the beginning of the month. Okay, that's the mitzvah. One might ask, why is this technical calendar thing the first mitzvah in the Torah? It's the first mitzvah in the Torah. It has to be significant if it's the first mitzvah in the Torah. Rishon Choshuv. Talked about this last week. First thing in a list is the most important. This is the most important mitzvah in the Torah. From a certain perspective, it is. So why is that? Well, Rav Ze'ev Javits suggests a reason. Rav Ze'ev Javits was one of the rabbinic leaders of the Chovevei Tzion movement. He died in the early 1900s, about 1924. He actually wrote part of the platform of the Mizrahi movement when it first started, or its mission statement, where he talked about how Torah and Zion are two inextricably linked concepts in Jewish identity and in Judaism. And he suggests that the significance of Kiddush HaChodesh, of dedicating the months and the years, time, is part of the extraction of the Jewish people from the culture of Egypt. Now we know that Chazal say, the rabbis tell us, that the reason the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering, was made with the lamb is that the lamb was a god of Egypt. So the Jews had to slaughter the god of Egypt. And they ate it roasted, completely intact. That is, They could not break any bones. That's in this week's Parsha also. Couldn't break any bones on it. It kept its shape. It was manifest that what the Bnei Yisrael were doing was eating, as it were, consuming what the Egyptians held to be their God. I also mentioned several months ago, in connection with the observance of the commandments of Pesach, the one that we principally associate with it, at least these days, is Chag HaMatzos, the eating of the matzah. I quoted my friend Moshe Khan, who quoted the name of the Balaturim, that we eat matzah for a similar reason, that the culture of Egypt, that Egypt really historically developed bread. They had 30 types of bread. They started using yeast instead of sourdough, which created a whole new possibility or vista in bread making. You could go from flatbreads to breads that rose, and they had all different kinds, and it was considered to be something of a delectable in Egypt to have bread, and it's reflected in the Torah on numerous occasions. So we rejected the bread, which was the symbol of the cultural sophistication of Egypt, and we eat a plain, flat matzah. And Rabbi Javits suggests that the following of the lunar calendar is a rejection of the Egyptian calendar. The Egyptians actually followed both the lunar calendar and a solar calendar, but eventually the solar calendar became dominant. The Egyptian calendar, according to the research that I did, was broken down as follows. 1 week was 10 days. 3 weeks was 1 month. 4 months was 1 season. 3 seasons and 5 holy days was 1 year. They needed to adjust by five days. And the Egyptian civil calendar stuck around for a long time. Eventually it was altered by Julius Caesar at about 46 BCE with the addition of a leap year day occurring once every 4 years. And the revised system actually forms the basis of the Western calendar that most of the Western society operates on now. We have to get out of Egypt. We have to get out of the place. We also have to get out of their culture and the way they kept time. This is Rabbi Javits. I'd like to suggest that there's an additional reason, which really perhaps is more comprehensive and more fundamental, which is that the calendar reflects the partnership of the Bnei Yisrael with the Almighty. Shabbos is independent of the Jews. Shabbos is counted from the day of creation. The holidays, on the other hand, depend on when the Beis Din HaGadol would establish the new month, because the months can be categorized as either of 29 days. There are 5 that are 29 days, 5 that are 30 days. And then there are 2 months that could be either 29 or 30. They could both be 29, one could be 29 and one 30, or they could both be 30. And depending on when the witness who saw the new month, the new moon, would come and appear and give testimony, that's when the Beis Din would establish the month. Right now, we do it on the basis of the calendar along the lines that I talked about just now. But in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, or more precisely times of the Beis Din, it was all open, and it depended. Eventually, they would coordinate the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. But when the holiday began depended on when the month began, and when the month began depended on when a Jew would come to the Beis Din and give testimony. So Shabbos is different from Yom Tov, from the holidays, and that's why the closing bracha in the Shemona Esrei for Shabbos is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos. Blessed are you, God, who sanctifies the Sabbath. In contrast, we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim for Yom Tov, which is Blessed are you, God, who sanctifies Israel and the times and the holidays. So Israel is sanctified, and Israel's sanctification is what grants the sanctification to the time, to the holidays. We are not subject to time. We take time. We control time. This is fundamental. This might also explain why we say Kel Adon Kol Hamasim, which talks about the planetary movements. We only say it on Shabbos, because the notion of a fixed cycle in time that is unalterable is the Shabbos. But for the holidays, that's up to us. Conceptually, that means that although time, shall we say, waits for no man, but what we do with our time, how we control our time, is up to us. Good Shabbos.